So I'd like to welcome all of you to Sanskrit 101. What I would like to do for the Sanskrit course is I'm going to not set things to mute all of you. I'm going to leave that up to you individually. So, just be aware of that. And when you join, make sure that you're muted, unless you want us to hear the dog barking or you yelling at your kids or whatever embarrassing things we've all sometimes had happen. Because sometimes you might want to unmute yourself so that you can repeat something back. So just if you're just joining us, we're leaving it up to you to mute and unmute yourself as needed. Okay, so I'd like to start with an invocation in Sanskrit. Yam Brahma Varunandra Rudra Marutastun Vandi Devyaistavayir Divyai Vedas Sapada Sakramo Upanishadar Gayanti Gam Samaga Dhyana Vastita Tadgatena Manasa Pashanti Yam Yogino Yasyantam Navidu Sura Suraganair Devaya Tasmai Namaha. I offer my pranams to the original Bhagavan Vishnu, who is the goal of meditation of mystics and yogis, who is worshipped by all of the controllers of universal affairs, including Brahma, Indra, and Shiva, whose glories are sung by the Vedas and Upanishads and the Vedangas. So the Sanskrit language is very ancient. In fact, it has existed, according to many, as long as the universe has been created. It has an intrinsic quality that it allows it to have vibrations that can resonate with our various chakras, with our pran. Therefore, there are bij mantras, which are Sanskrit vibrations, which are used in meditation and in yoga practice. And in Ayurveda, the relevancy of Sanskrit is that it defines many of the terms that we use. A lot of the terminology that we use in Ayurveda is Sanskrit terminology. So there are a few goals of this course. So I'm going to go through a slide presentation, and I may jump around here and there to different materials that I have. Okay, so now we have the slide presentation. Okay, so our focus is going to be Sanskrit and Ayurveda. We're not going to try to give you an exhaustive Sanskrit course. There's a traditional saying that it takes 12 years to learn Sanskrit. Now, I'm not telling you that to make it intimidating. In fact, it only took me really about 1 year. I did study at it fairly hard. I think many other people have done something similar. It's not a terribly easy language. The 12-year figure comes from learning all of the other things that go along with it and being able to compose Sanskrit poetry, which really requires an exhaustive knowledge. So we don't even need to teach you enough to be able to do your own translations, but we would like to help you be able to make sense of things more easily, to have a good pronunciation also, so that if you meet someone like Dr. Vasant Lad and you talk about things, you're not going to make a mispronunciation like Prakruti instead of Prakriti. So, you know, we would like to help you have that kind of grasp and also to understand how words go together in compounds. You know, so for example, when we talk about the Jataragni, you can recognize that there are two words involved: Jatara, meaning the belly, and Agni, meaning fire, and that when Jatara combines with Agni, it becomes Jataragni. Even simple things like Jnana, meaning knowledge, and Indriya, meaning senses, becomes Jnanendriya, knowledge acquiring senses. So these are simple things. It's not going to be really hard to grasp that. So we would like to help you understand basic concepts and the nature of the Sanskrit language. And we want to also learn some Sanskrit vocabulary terms that are common in Ayurveda along with their meanings. We want to learn basics of pronunciation, and we want to learn basics of word combination and the use of suffixes. So there are a lot of suffixes and prefixes that are used in Sanskrit. So what's an example? Here's an example, a very simple example. We have Prakriti, and we have, I'm just sending this in the chat, and we have Vikriti. So just as a reminder, if you're just joining us, we're leaving you responsible for muting and unmuting yourself. So Prakriti and Vikriti are two examples of words that use prefixes. So Kriti means an exhibition or something that is seen, a result of action. And the prefix pra is used when something is predominant, okay? For example, we sometimes use the term of respect, Prabhu, meaning someone has mastery. We may call someone, Monica may refer to me as Atul Prabhu. It's a term of respect. It's like calling someone master something or other. And Vikriti means deviated, turned away, differing. So Prakriti is what is our naturally predominant nature, and Vikriti is our the temporary manifestation, the way that our nature has become transformed. Okay. So these are some of the basic things. These are some very basic prefixes and suffixes. It's better, rather than try to construe your own meanings from the prefixes and suffixes, we want to make you familiar with them so that you can have an idea, but you still want to remember the meanings of these words. So we're also in this course going to cover some topics from Bhagavad Gita. We would cover Atma Tattva, or self-knowledge. We've also started to cover that a little bit in the Sankhya context. We're going to talk a little bit about karma as described in the Gita, the chain of action and reaction. We will also go a little bit more in depth on the gunas, the three basic qualities of material nature, and the mind and senses and how they interact. And then we will talk about some of the systems of yoga as described in Bhagavad Gita. Karma yoga, which is the yoga of work as sacrifice, giving the results of one's work as a sacrifice, as a system of yoga. Ashtanga yoga, the eightfold yoga system, beginning with yama, niyama, asana, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and culminating in samadhi. Jnana yoga, the yoga of wise discrimination, and bhakti yoga, the yoga of loving devotion. So we do an assessment, and our assessment, we will try to, quiz you on your pronunciation. And it's not so much a quiz as we will probably, in a few stages, try to interact with you to evaluate your pronunciation and try to help you with correcting it, because there's just no substitute for that. We also will ask you to pronounce any 10 terms from the glossary list, and then you can also pronounce any single sutra or verse from Bhagavad Gita, Sushruta Samhita, or Charaka Samhita. Now, this is a very useful thing. For example, Sharirendriya Sattvatma Samyogo Dhari Jivatam Nityagaschanubandhascha Paryayayayuruchate. This is the definition of the Ayu in Ayurveda. It is the combination of body, mind, senses, consciousness, and the Atma, all working both together and individually. So Sanskrit is a rich language, and it can give us these kind of mnemonic keys. Now, if you think about that, listen again. When I say this verse, listen how there's a flow of long and short syllables and how it makes a type of rhythm. Sharirendriya Sattvatma Samyogo Dhari Jivitam Nityagaschanubandhascha Paryayayayuruchate. Do you hear? I've also clapped my hands along with that just to make the rhythm a little more clear. Using rhythm actually helps our memory. So if you actually learn, even if you learn one or two of these Sanskrit verses, and you can repeat them with a decent pronunciation, it's actually a very helpful thing to memorize. And also, the sages who have given this knowledge, there is also a type of knowledge enriching advantage in terms of being able to actually say a Sanskrit verse. We will actually receive knowledge through a type of subtle process when we're able to repeat one of these Sanskrit verses. We'll also have a written quiz, and we'll ask something about some questions on Gita, and give a written explanation of any important verse, such as the one I just mentioned. Talk about the relation and importance of Sanskrit to Ayurveda. Try to match at least 10 Sanskrit terms for Ayurvedic anatomy related to body parts, and also provide some examples of Sanskrit as a common ground of understanding for scholars, teachers, and practitioners of Ayurveda worldwide. So it's an important common vocabulary. I'll give you an example. In studying Jyotish, or Vedic astrology, I've found that there are many things that are commonly translated. For example, if you pick up just about any book on, Indian astrology, it will tell you that Saturn is a windy planet. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean that there are winds that blow on the surface of Saturn? Well, I then studied, I looked at Parashara Horashastra, which is one of the authoritative texts on Jyotish. And what it says is that Saturn has Vata Prakriti. Okay, what does that tell you? Does that sound familiar to all of you? I hope it does. Saturn has Vata Prakriti, and that means that where Saturn has an influence in the Kundali or chart, there's going to be a predominance of Vata. Now, when I say windy, do you immediately understand Vata Prakriti? No. So that's why using common vocabulary is really important. So I can say, yes, this person has Vata Prakriti, and there is the Vikriti is such and such. So this is a common vocabulary. You could talk to an Ayurvedic practitioner from France or from India or from Russia or from China, and if they have studied and learned some of this Sanskrit terminology, they'll know what you're talking about. You do not have to give an imprecise translation. Another example I'll give, there are some words like bhakti. What is bhakti? Well, we say bhakti is the yoga of loving devotion when we say bhakti yoga. But bhakti, it is a word that doesn't really precisely translate that well into English. It means devotion where you are sharing part of your soul, where you are connecting and joining and sharing and giving of yourself. You know, that's not something that just comes across by saying devotion, because if I say devotion, you might think of, people in a cult acting like zombies or something like that. But really, it's something so much deeper. It goes very deep into the depths of the Atma. So these are some of the things we want to just, talk about in general, and in why Sanskrit is important as a common vocabulary for Ayurveda. So we're going to be talking about all these things. I'm just starting out by telling you what I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to tell it to you, and then I'm going to repeat what we've said. So here's an example. So I'm going to start again. I did the invocation, which was a fairly long verse. Now we're going to look at this very short verse from Bhagavad Gita. Bandhuratmatmanastasya yenatmaevatmana jitaha anatmanastu shatrutve vartetatmaeva shatruvat. Now, before I go into this, I want to just digress a little bit and talk about the diacritics. Note how we use this diacritical system. So this is called IAST. I don't remember what the acronym means. It's something like it's a standard system of diacritics specifically used in Indic languages. And it's a standard that's used by scholars throughout the world. So we have tried to use IAST diacritics for our materials, at least the ones that I've had the opportunity to edit. There are still, you may still see things that are written in kind of Indian transliteration, like a Prakriti written as Prakruti, but that's actually not right. It should be Prakriti, and sometimes you'll see I write a capital R, meaning it's this R with a dot under it, which you don't see in this particular verse. The R with a dot under it is the so Prakriti. And Prakriti, the Kr in Prakriti, it's not like a Kre, it's it's gonna, it's really like one consonant with one vowel. We are going to go more into depth on that. So this verse has been written out with diacritics. You see there's a A with a macron over it, that line over the A, that means that it's ah. So in this system, is pronounced like and we're going to get into that. We're going to talk about, how you shape your mouth to say these different sounds. Ah is like sort of like when you open your mouth and say the dentist's office. We have things like the H with a dot under it. It's just like a little echo. Chitaha. And S with this acute accent is sh. It's a sibilant. It's sh. It's like the SH in shy. The E is always pronounced A, and it's an A sound, not like in English when we say hey, it's A. It's the mouth doesn't move when we say it. So we're going to go into all that, but I just wanted to point out this is written with diacritics. So listen again. Now I'm going to say this verse again and listen to the rhythm of long and short syllables. That is actually an important part of the Sanskrit language. The Sanskrit language actually is very elegant. It has a built-in system of error correction and error detection, so that even if I cannot precisely hear every single syllable, I can sometimes infer that missing syllable just based on the context and the rhythm of it. So here I'm going to say this verse again, and I'm going to give you the rhythm along with it. Bandhuratmatmanastasya yenatmaivatmana jita anatmanastu shatrutve vartetatmaiva shatruvat. So again, do you hear that? It's kind of like a dance. In fact, there's one very interesting, there's a whole realm of Sanskrit meters in poetry. One of them is called Matnamayuri. Matnamayuri means the mad peahen. One example of Matnamayuri goes like this. Sham shaste deva maritya daya ete brahmendradya deva gana rudrapuroga krida bandham vishramidam yasya vibhuman tasmai nityam nata namaste karavama. You hear the kind of dance, stum bum 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 bum. So that's, I'm giving it a little more emphasis really than we should, because we don't actually give an emphasis or stress. Sanskrit flows. So, again, now I'm going to say this again, and I'm just going to flow through it. Bandhuratmatmanastasya yenatmaivatmana jitaha anatmanastu shatrutve vartetatmaiva shatruvat. I'm not stressing any of the syllables. It's a simple flow. Some of the syllables are simply twice as long as others. It's very elegant and it's very simple, but it also helps to it helps to reinforce the meaning, and it's just so much more fun to say something that has rhythm than to do things without rhythm. That's a personal bias. So this verse says that for one who has conquered the mind, it is your best friend, but if one has failed to do so, it is your worst enemy. And we can break the words up. So bandhu means friend. Atma, in this case, means mind. But atma, atmanaha means of the atma. Atma means mind. It can also mean the soul, the self. We've talked about atma tattva in the context of Sankhya, and the atma, or the self, that is that little spiritual spark which is surrounded by the ego and mind and intellect, and which is the spark of life that when it has left the body, we say that the person has died. So the Atma, or mind, is the friend of the Atma, or the self, for that person whom the mind has been conquered by the self. So if the soul, if the self is actually in control of the mind and is able to keep the mind peaceful, how does that happen? Well, it is said that the mind has 3 vrittis. Does anyone remember what we've said the 3 vrittis of the mind are? In Sankhya, we've talked about the 3 vrittis, or occupations of the mind. So what are those 3 vrittis? Can anyone remember? You can either unmute yourself and say it, or you can type it in the chat. 3 vrittis. Okay, they're not the 3 gunas, but 3 vrittis, or occupations of the mind. What are the things that the mind does? The first one is thinking, right? And I've given an example of, I think about ice cream, and then the feeling comes, is the second vritti, or occupation of the mind. Feeling, oh, that would feel really good right now. It's hot outside. It would taste so creamy and sweet and delicious, and oh, mint with chocolate chip, yum, yum. And then there's willing. Okay, I'm going to go get up and get myself some. So thinking, feeling, and willing. So when the Atma is able to keep on top of these urges of the mind, then it is said that the mind actually is a help to the Atma. Anatmana, now anatmana is referring to someone who is not mindful, someone who does not stay on top of the mind. Then it is said that the mind is an enemy, shatrutve. It remains in enmity. Vartidatmaiva shatruvat. So it acts against the best interests of the Atma. So this is a very interesting verse because it's using Atma referring to the soul and Atma referring to the mind in such a way that there's only one way you can infer the meaning. It's sort of like a little word puzzle. Well, we're not going to teach this course and expect you to be able to decode little word puzzles like this, but it's sort of like a little tour, and we're pointing out, okay, here's how Leonardo da Vinci painted the Mona Lisa. You're not going to have to paint a Mona Lisa, but we'd like you to appreciate perspective and the use of color blending and all these other things that were done. So that's our art appreciation for Sanskrit verses. Okay, so how is Sanskrit written? So traditionally, we'll use Devanagari script. So here's an example. Here is Devanagari written in Devanagari script. This is the IAST diacritic version of Devanagari. And this is Devanagari written in Devanagari. So that's traditionally used. There are other scripts as well, such as Bengali, and there are some older scripts also used for Sanskrit. But most commonly, if you get a book on Ayurveda that has Sanskrit terms or Sanskrit verses, they'll have the Sanskrit in Devanagari script, and they may have an English translation along with it. Not usually the diacritics in between, just Devanagari and the translation. It's not necessary to learn, but it's helpful because the Devanagari script is naturally arranged phonetically. It actually is arranged in rows and columns in a grid rather than just as a, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So again, we use a standard transliteration scheme called IAST, and we use diacritical marks such as the macron for long vowels such as A, E, and U. We use a subscript dot for R, N, and Sh. acute accent for sh. Now notice that there are two of these sibilants, sh and sh. There's a subtle difference between them, which is not that important right now. We also use a superscript dot for ng and and we use a tilde for this n that's used in jnana, and we'll cover this later in detail. The C in IAST is always pronounced like the ch in reach without breath. Think of it sort of like in Italian, ciao. In Italian, C-I-A-O is pronounced ciao. It's not ciao or kiao, it's ciao. So that's the usage of that C in Sanskrit. There's also a CH, which is simply the same thing with breath. We're going to talk about breath and no breath. Gya is pronounced like gya. That is actually one type of pronunciation. Others will sometimes pronounce it slightly differently, but I think that is the easiest way to approach this combination of J with a tilde and whatever comes after it. Yeah, for example, in Gyanendriya. So Sanskrit is used in our Ayurvedic source texts, and this allows us to have what we sometimes refer to as pregnant meanings, such as guna and sattva. And these meanings can sometimes vary based on context. That can be a little confusing. Again, let's go back to that example. Bandhuratmatmanastasya ninatmaivatmanajita. I've used atma in this verse twice, and they're meaning different things. It's talking about atma meaning the soul and atma meaning the mind. And based on the context, you have to decode the puzzle, and then you get the full meaning of it. Or you can read the translation. That's the easy way to do it. So we just want to help you understand what I like to call the information density of Sanskrit, and this will help you to understand some translations better. You know, and you can ask questions too if something doesn't make sense. But there's a lot of density of information in Sanskrit. Being able to look at source texts like Charaka Samhita and Sushruta Samhita is a must if you are a serious student of Ayurveda, if you want to teach Ayurveda, if you want to write books on Ayurveda, if you want to go very deeply into Ayurveda, as deep as possible, so that you can help the people that you see and, you know, gain the full understanding of all the subtleties of Ayurveda, you need to be able to read source text. Even if you read a translation, there's still going to be so many Sanskrit terms that are used that you need to have a little bit of a handle on it. You know, for example, if you were to go and attend a seminar with Dr. Ludd in New Mexico, you know, he's one of the luminaries of Ayurveda practice in the modern world, and he loves to use Sanskrit words and quote Sanskrit verses and quote Sanskrit verses from the Bhagavad Gita and quote Sanskrit verses from Charaka Samhita and quote Sanskrit verses from Sushruta Samhita. So, of course, you know, Monica is also a scholar of Sanskrit. She learned from when she was in high school, and she doesn't like to advertise. Another of our teachers, Dr. Aparna, who's not with us today, I'm hoping that she's also going to participate and help share her knowledge of Sanskrit. She actually has a degree in Sanskrit from one of the leading universities in Sanskrit study, University of Washington. I don't even have a degree in Sanskrit. I audited some courses at Columbia University back when I was a student, but mostly I'm self-taught. But Aparna has an actual degree. Monica studied for 4 or 5 years, and when we hear people like Dr. Ludd and using all the Sanskrit, we become very happy. We're very happy to hear that. But for some people, it may be a little daunting. Hopefully, you can become a little familiar with Sanskrit so that it won't be so daunting. but Sanskrit is used a lot. And again, this is a common ground. Everyone who's involved in Ayurveda worldwide, they recognize Sanskrit terms. They use Sanskrit terms. And we want to help you to be able to pronounce Sanskrit terms. We want to help you be able to say prakriti, not prakruti. Please, no prakruti. It's prakriti, 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 prakriti. Okay? Prakriti, not prakruti, prakriti. So if you can say these things properly, then this will help. It will show people that, I'm a serious student of Ayurveda. For example, in yoga, we do pranayam. And if I hear someone who's a yoga practitioner say, yes, I practice pranayam, I know, this is probably a person who's been studying yoga for 20 years or so, and they've probably lived in an ashram in India and studied from a guru, and they have really dedicated themselves to studying yoga, as opposed to someone said, oh yeah, I saw something about pranayam on Oprah. Okay, well, you're a little familiar with it, that's good, but not quite as serious. So it's the same thing. If you can say some of the basic terms in a way that's recognizable to someone who knows Sanskrit, it's sort of like a little flag that says, hey, I'm serious about Ayurveda. I'm a serious student of Ayurveda. So there's an immense body of very valuable research which is published in India, which uses Sanskrit terminology, and sometimes it provides very terse references, and it assumes that the reader can associate one Sanskrit word with a page full of background. For example, some of our instructors like Dr. Kirti and Dr. Sahana, they have a very deep and thorough knowledge of Sanskrit to get a degree in Ayurveda from an Indian Ayurveda college. You have to have a thorough understanding of Sanskrit. It's a very common thing in India and in Indian publications. Anything discussing Ayurveda is just going to drop Sanskrit terms like nobody's business. And if we would like to try to put the tools in your hands so that if that happens, if you run into something like that, you're not going to be bewildered. You would know where to start to try to decode it, to try to make sense of, well, this is a paper that's written in English, but it's using so many Sanskrit terms, I don't know what the person's saying. What is this? The vikar of the Chitaragni is resulting in the so on. It's like, where do I start? There's just so many Sanskrit terms. So having some knowledge, having some Sanskrit vocabulary, and understanding how Sanskrit is used, this will also help you. Okay, so it's actually going to be very useful. So again, now here's something that we mentioned before briefly, and in this case, we've got the Devanagari version of this verse, Sharirendriya Sattvatma. So that's this first line here, Sharirendriya Sattvatma, and then Samyogo Dhari Jivatam. So usually when we represent the transliterated version in diacritics, we'll break up one line of Devanagari into two lines of transliterated, just because it's a little easier to read. Sanskrit verses usually have 4 pada, or feet. 4 pada is sometimes used as a metaphor for something that has 4 parts. So this is one pada, Sharirendriya Sattvatma. Another pada is Samyogo Dhari Jivatam. Another pada, Nityagashchanubandhascha. And then the final one, Paryaya Rayurujjate. And that's also a little bit of a tongue twister. So there are a couple of translations that can be given. One is, I'm going to give you something that you might read in a Indian publication on Ayurveda. Living entity is the conjunction of the body, senses, organs, mind, and soul. Now, that, I believe, is taken verbatim from somewhere. Now, my preferred translation is a little more verbose. What is life, or ayus? It is the combined existence of body, senses, mind, intellect, and self, or atma, sustaining the functions of life and growth, both in their individual functions and in totality. So if you look at translation 1, this is not really adding more words than is in here. It's basically just taking, one word at a time and getting that Sanskrit into English. This translation is almost a little bit more like a summary study, and it has tried to expand or decode some of the density of meaning into all of the meanings that are implied. So some people are not always going to agree with this, and they're going to say, well, Atul, you really should separate your interpretation. I'm going to stand by saying that this is really the direct meaning of what is in this verse is what I'm giving here, and I'm not giving an interpretation. It's really pretty much what's here, but just decoded slightly. Okay. So this is a verse. This is, one verse, and this could be a verse that you could learn and you could recite. If you wanted to understand and know one verse to talk about Ayurveda, this is a great verse to learn. Why? Because when we talk about, if we said Ayurveda is the science of life, okay, what does that mean to people? If you go and ask a room full of people, what does the science of life mean? They're going to give you probably a room full of answers. But when we say the Ayu in Ayurveda, there's a very specific meaning. There is a very specific meaning. We are talking about this. We're talking about this combined existence of all of these things, the body, the senses, mind, intellect, and the self, and the way that they're sustaining the functions of life and growth, both individually and in totality. That's a lot. That's a very deep definition of the Ayu in Ayurveda. It's this that makes it a holistic approach as opposed to a reductionistic approach. In a reductionistic approach, we break things down and we try to understand the parts and divide them further and further. In fact, this is one of the Shadarshanas. Does anyone remember which is the Shadarshana system, which breaks things down into their atomic components? Well, that's kind of quite a tough question. I'll answer it. It is Vaisheshika. Vaisheshika comes from Vishesh, or the distinguishing characteristic. I apologize for jumping around so much, but I want to just give you an idea. This is like the whirlwind tour of all the things that I find to be really cool about Sanskrit and how it can convey a lot of information and how everything is pretty much connected to everything else. So, there's just so much that we could learn about Sanskrit, and you could spend a year or two of intense study to be able to learn enough to be able to take this verse and understand how we get the translation. But, for this context for Ayurveda, at least if you understand the connection of how things go together and how the meanings can be embedded and encoded, I think that's going to be a great help to you. So again, here we have the vocabulary that's broken out from that verse. So Sharira is the physical body. So you hear the term Sharira sometimes in Ayurveda. Sharira vyadi, bodily affliction, right? Indriya, senses. We have the Gyanendriya, or knowledge acquiring senses, and the Karmendriya, or the working senses. Knowledge acquiring senses, we're all familiar with: sight, sound, touch, taste, and sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell. And the working senses, the ability to move, the ability to grasp things, the ability to speak, the ability to evacuate, and the ability to procreate. Sattva. Sattva is the one of the three gunas. It also refers to existence, the mind or consciousness. Atma refers to the soul. Samyoga means in harmony, conjointly. Dhati meaning sustaining. Jivatam is the living and growing functions. Nityagaha is separately. Cha is and. Anubandha means connectedly. And pariyaya is how it is defined. Ayuhu, life as understood in Ayurveda, and uchite is said. So this is just breaking this verse down into its components. Here's another great verse that you can learn that is a very important definition in Ayurveda. What's the definition of health? Okay, it doesn't get more core than that. Samadosha, samagnischa, samadhatu malakriyaha, prasannatmendriya manaha, swastya ityabhidhiyate. So this is from Sushruta Samhita. Samadosha, when the three doshas are balanced. Samagnischa, when the various agnis are balanced and stable. Samadhatu malakriyaha, when the dhatus are in balance and elimination of waste is regular and efficient. Prasannatmendriya manaha, when the self or atma, the body, senses, and mind are in a joyful state. Swastya ityabhidhiyate, this is said to be the state of good health. So that little summary: health is balanced doshas plus balanced dhatus plus balanced elimination plus a pleasing state of senses and mind. So again, very core definition, how we define good health according to Ayurveda. By that definition, if you had tubes and wires that were keeping you alive, that really wouldn't be defined as good health. It would be defined as keeping alive. Everyone knows that, but that's our definition in Ayurveda. We want to be happy. We want to have things in balance. We want to have timely elimination of waste. This is good health. So, and here's another. Now, this is a sutra. A sutra, as opposed to a verse, it doesn't have 4 padas. It doesn't have the 4 feet lines. It's a little terse saying. A sutra means it's like a little pearl that's strung on a thread. And sutras aim at the maximum information density. There's no additives. It's just the straightest, shortest path to saying something. Prayojanam jasya swastasya swastya rakshanam atmarasya vikara prashamanam cha. So this is from Charaka Samhita. The purpose of Ayurveda is to maintain continued good health for healthy persons and to alleviate disorders in the diseased. And I've paraphrased that by saying, It is to synergistically and holistically manage the imbalance in bodily and mental health without any side effects and guide the patient back to a healthy condition. So it has been said in a very few number of Sanskrit words. Prayojanam is the aim and objective or the goal. Swasthya for a healthy person, one who is in good health. Swasthya, of good health. Rakshanam, the protection, so keeping good health for the person who's healthy. Aturasya, one who's afflicted, one who's diseased. Vikara prashamanam, so the vikara are the things which get you unbalanced, the things that have put you in a diseased state. Prashamanam is the pacification, balance, or rectification. So this is again, this is a very important sutra. If you wanted to memorize something, this is another option. You could memorize this. Prayojanam jasya swastasya swastya rakshanam aturasya vikara prashamanam cha. So again, a very core definition of Ayurveda defining its aims and objectives. So 4 types of Ayu. Again, here's another important verse. Hitahitam sukham dukkam ayurasya hitahitam manam chatachayatroptam ayurveda sa uchyate. So there are 4 types of life or ayus described in Ayurvedic texts. There's hitayu. It's a life with righteous living, truthfulness, and living in harmony with nature. Ahita ayu, which is a self-absorbed life, not living in harmony with nature, other entities, and environment. There's sukha ayu, good health with sound body and mind, and life with comforts, and giving some partial consideration to living in harmony with nature, trying to be happy. And this is what most people aim at. And then there's dukkha ayu, a disturbed mental and physical state, and negative karma accumulation. Like we've had these wildfires which have been devastating the county that we live in here in San Diego, and they have a strong suspicion that some people may have set them at this time when there were these super dry conditions with dry winds and humidity like between 3 and 6% relative humidity and high temperatures, sort of like, just make a spark and everything goes up in flames. What kind of person would do something like that? A person who's totally in the dukkhayu, very disturbed mentally, unhappy mentally, unhappy physically, likes to make other people unhappy, will do crazy, stupid, dangerous, destructive things which aren't going to make anyone happy just because they can. That is kind of the definition of dukkhayu. So again, here's another good verse that you could learn that would, that gives a definition of these 4 types of life. Why do we learn something like this? Hitayu, ahitayu, sukhayu, dukkhayu. Because we need to understand it's something about the psychology. It's something about what a person's goal is in life. But again, we have a Sanskrit definition that puts all of these things together. So how do we achieve perfect health? Nityam hita hara vihara sevi samikshikari vishayeshu asaktaha data sama satyapara kamavan aptopta sevi cha bhavet yarogya. I actually need to fix. I am looking for the source for this so I can update, because some of the diacritics here are not right or missing. Those who follow a diet plan and exercise plan suitable to their dosha according to the season and time, who avoid overindulgence of their senses, who are virtuous, godly, and live a simple life without attachment to mundane matters, those who are charitable in nature and truthful become free of diseases. So this is describing the condition under which someone who's living very much in balance with the external world can have balance internally very easily. And then finally, there are some terms that we use to classify disorders. So there are two types of disorders. There are sharira, physical disorders, and manasa. So we sometimes use the patronymic form. So from sharira, sharira meaning the body, we sometimes can use sharira with a long a instead of a, and refer to physical or something that is related to the body. And manasa we use quite a bit, because manas is mind, manasa is mental. So manasa vyadi is psychological disorder. And then there are three types of protocols we use: bahira parimarjana, external therapies; antara parimarjana, internal herbs and nutrition; and shastra, following meditation, yoga, mantras, and protocols that are described in Vedic texts. And finally, we have a definition of ojas. So what is the definition of ojas? Oja somatmakam snigdham shuklam shitam stiram saram viviktam mridumitsanam cha pranayatanam uttamam. So the ojas is like the essence of nectar. It is like that which gives longevity of life. Soma is something that it is like the nectar of the gods. It means that it gives something that gives long life. It is very pleasing. It is white in color. It is cool by nature. It is steady or still. And it is the refined essence. Sada means the refined essence. Cream is also called sada because cream is considered to be the most essential part of milk. And then from cream we can make ghee. Viviktam mridumritsanam cha. It is the essence of it gives softness, pranayatanam uttamam, and it sustains life. So this is the definition of ojas. I actually can put together a better translation. So that's it for this short presentation. I want to talk a little bit about the diacritics. So this is our quick reference to diacritics. So this is where we start talking about the pronunciation. So in this diacritical system, we have the Roman letters have their own pronunciation even without diacritics. So is like the in but. Ah is like the ah in father. I is like the I in pin, and E is like the E in peach. U is like the U in push, and U is like the OO in cool. Re is like the re in river. So if you say prakriti, that's fine. It's actually just a little shorter than that. Prakriti, prakriti. It's not exactly voiced like the re, but if you say re, that's fine. Prakriti is not fine. A is like the A in cake. And we're going to go over a little distinction there. O is like the O in vote. Is like the nasal in sing. And the H with the dot under it. It's a slight echo of the preceding vowel, like without a stress on the final A. Then we have the N with a dot over it and the N with a tilde over it. These are class nasals. They take on the qualities of the consonant that they follow, like the N in sank or the N in ranch. Gya is pronounced like gya. C is like the C in Italian ciao or the CH in reach. The T with the dot under it is like the T in put, with the tongue against the ridge behind the upper teeth. This is more similar to the way that we normally say da in most Western languages. Da, D with a dot under it, is like the D in road, but it's the same place as T. So if you put your tongue up against the back of your front teeth, and then move your tongue up a little bit, you feel that little ridge, that alveolar ridge, which is behind your upper teeth. That's where your tongue contacts to make these da, 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 da. The T without a dot under it is actually pronounced with your tongue against the tip of your upper front teeth. Da and da. And those are slightly softer sounds. This N with a dot under it is like the N in run, but it's in the same place. So na, na. The tongue is na against that alveolar ridge behind the upper row of front teeth. The S with the dot under it is like SH in shop. Sh, sh. The S with an acute accent is between S in sink and SH in shine. So you don't really need to worry too much about this, but if you want to be precise, this is sh. So sink, shine, sh. Sh. This is sh. This is sh. 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 So there's a slight difference there. It's very subtle. It's very hard to make it out in language. The good news is that Sanskrit is constructed in a way that there are very few things where the meaning of the word is going to be completely different if you mix up the sha and the sa, or with the same is true with the ta with the tongue behind the teeth and ta with the tongue on the tip of the teeth. It's just going to sound like it's a non-word, which you can easily infer the correct word from. Okay, so I would like to just take a 1-minute break. If we have any questions at this point, I'm going to pause the recording. We're going to just take a break for about 2 minutes, give you all a chance if you need to get some water. And then we're going to do some interactive stuff, okay? We're going to go over the pronunciation now a little bit more in detail, and we're going to do some interactive things. So, be prepared to get called on to talk after our short break. Okay. Okay, so I've resumed recording. So just a couple of quick overview things on Sanskrit. Sanskrit is a language which is defined by Sanskrit. It's not a language that has loan words from other places. Sanskrit words mostly come from verbal roots, Sanskrit verbal roots, with prefixes and suffixes. I gave the example of kriti, which comes from kri, the same root from which we get karma, and kriya, and adding prefixes prakriti and pra to make prakriti and vi for vikriti. So we derive so many Sanskrit words just from a few verbal roots with many different prefixes and suffixes. Sanskrit words tend to have a wide variety of potential meanings based on context. I sometimes refer to this as a pregnant meaning because it's a meaning that is just bursting. It's got meaning inside it. And we want to understand a little bit about how it works and learn some meanings in context. So as we said before, all of the primary texts in Ayurveda are in Sanskrit. The translations are accurate, but sometimes they're very terse. And remember, I gave that example of this translation of Sharirendriya Sattvatma Samyogo Dhari Jivatam, which was very terse. And it was a correct translation, but it would be very easy to misinterpret or miss the entire meaning. Again, we're going to cover basics of pronunciation, and this slide presentation also has some basic terms, which I'm not going to go through every single vocabulary word here, but this is, this is meant for you doing the Sanskrit course to try to get yourself familiar with terms. So we use diacritics because there are some sounds which are not present in English. There are also long and short vowels, and these are important. This makes a difference. For example, sharira is the body, sharira is things related to the body. Manas is mind, manasa is mental, things related to the mind. So we use diacritics, and we really have been trying to switch over all of our course materials to use diacritics so that you do not see prakruti written like this. Prakriti, it's supposed to be prakriti, but everyone reads it as prakruti. I'm sorry. Everyone reads it as prakriti because that's natural. But really, the intention of that writing of prakriti is supposed to be that you pronounce prakriti, prakriti. But instead, people read that and they tend to say prakriti because there's not really a standard, that's not written according to a standard way of writing. The actual standard way of writing prakriti is, let's see, should have it in this presentation. Okay, well, maybe I don't. But it's basically prakriti using the replace that capital R with the R with a dot under it. This actually is a system called the Harvard-Kyoto system, which I will sometimes use when I don't have time to get the right diacritics put in someplace. There's a Harvard-Kyoto system, and this writing of prakriti using a capital R for the R with a dot under it is actually means that it's the R with a dot under it. So again, we just went over this list. This is our quick diacritical guide. Now, I'd like to actually go over pronunciation. And to do that, I'm going to use this Sanskrit alphabet. So what I've got on these 2 pages, on these 3 pages actually, this is the entire gamut of the Sanskrit Varnakrama, which you could say is the alphabet, but it's arranged phonetically, okay? So first we have this group of vowels or swara, Ishwara sound. A, I, U, Re, Ri, Li, E, I, O, Au, and We're going to go over this a little bit more slowly and so that you have a chance to get it. The consonants are in rows and columns. Now notice how there's a row, there's a column here. This is a column of hard consonants that don't have a breath. This is a column of hard consonants that do have a breath. I'm going to make that green. So you see how you got a column there? And then you also have a column of soft consonants that don't have breath. And you also have these soft consonants that do have breath. And then finally you have the nasals. So we've got this column arrangement, and then you've also got rows. So we've got the velars, those ones that are pronounced in the back of the throat. We're going to go through these by rows. We've got our palatals, which are pronounced using the soft palate. We've got the retroflex. They're pronounced with the tongue against that alveolar ridge. We've got the dentals. They are pronounced using the tongue against the tip of the top row of front teeth. And then the labials, which are pronounced using the labia or the lips. There are semivowels, and these come on their own row. And then there are the sibilants and fricative, sa, sha, sa, and ha. So let's start with the, so let's go over these. So, and again, we're going to go over these together. So these are ka, ka, ga, gha, and nga. These palatals are cha, cha, ja, cha, and nya. The retroflex are da, ka, da, dha, and na. And the dentals are da, dha, da, dha, and na. The labials are ba, pa, ba, bha, and ma. The semivowels, ya, ra, la, and va. The sibilants, sha, sha, sa, and finally, ha. So some of these seem familiar, others have subtle differences. So we're going to go through these now and try to go over them a little interactively and have all of you try. So we start with Now I'm going to draw a little diagram here. So this triangle here has 3 points. At this point there is a. At this point there is e. At this point there is u. Now if we go a little further out, we'll have a, we'll have e, and we'll have u. We also have some in-betweens, which we're going to get to. So think about the position of your mouth. So if I ask you, I'm going to write this that's the A with a macron over it. That's the long version. So start out, open your mouth wide and say ah, ah. So this is actually the second thing that we have here. All right, so you can all unmute yourself, and I'm going to pause the recording so you don't have to, worry about whether anyone's going to hear you. Unpausing the recording. The next set is I and E. So now we're going from this part of the triangle to here. So think about if you were smiling, you're stretching your mouth out a little bit, and you say I, like the I in pen, and then you stretch your mouth out a little further and say E. Okay, now I'm going to pause the recording. All right, so I started recording again. So now notice that we've got this diagram. We've got here. We've got I, E here. Now we're going to go down to the bottom, and we're going to talk about ooh and ooh. Okay, I'm going to pause the recording. The ooh sound is not like in English we might say lose. When I say lose, and especially where I'm from, if I'm from the Southwest, I'm going to say lose is going to be something like that. Lose. I'm saying, honey, you don't want to lose. You're going to lose me if you don't treat me right. So I'm not trying to make fun of anyone, but the point is, no, we don't do that. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Okay, I'm going to pause recording again. So we're going to come back to this triangle. Now we're going to talk about re and ri. I'm not even going to bother trying to really go into re. Re is a little tough. And you're practically never going to find it. But we're going to talk about re and ri. So think about when you say ra. If you want to flap your tongue against that little alveolar ridge behind the top row of front teeth. Ra, ra, ra. So it's re. It's zi, re, re. It's not like there's kind of a Germanic, very guttural R that's in the back of your mouth. It's more like a Spanish that always, for example, if you in Spanish the R is ere, and there's a double R which is ere, and there's like a little trill that goes on there. So that's more like the Sanskrit ra sound, and the re uses that R that's in the front of the mouth. Okay, so I'm going to pause. That's good. So this is the re in Prakriti. Prakriti. Okay, so now I'm going to pause recording, and I'm going to have you say after me Prakriti. Resume. And I said I'm not going to go over re. That's kind of a tough one. Okay, now we're going to get back to the triangle because we're going to talk about A. And A is not like the English A and hey or hey. It's actually something that we say without moving the mouth in between. So now think about is over here and E is over here, and if you slide your mouth in between, here's what I'm going to have you do with me. We're going to slide our mouth in between these two extrema, and then we're going to stop in the middle. So I'm going to say it, and then you say it together with me, and I'm going to pause the recording. Okay, so we slid from I, and we then stopped halfway at A. So in I, you actually change your mouth shape when you say it. You go from to E, I. So it's it's actually moving, but it's not a slide move. It's I. So okay, so this I is like I and ice. Now we're going to come to another in between. Okay, and let's see if I can draw that one in here so that I is actually moving along through here. So now we have a slide that we're going to do. If we go from ah to oo and we stop in between, we're going to reach o. So we're going to do that. So I'm going to stop recording in just a second. We're going to go ow. Remember mouth position. This was the mouth open wide. This was the mouth kind of pushed out like we're blowing out a candle. Ow. Ow. Okay, I'm going to stop recording and we're going to stop at ow. Oh. Okay. So now I'll tell you another thing that's a little amusing. So remember we had ah. Now there is no ah sound in Sanskrit. For example, the ah in law, that's not a sound that's in Sanskrit. Ah. So for example, if you hear a native speaker of Indian languages talking about going to see his lawyer, he's not talking about a lack of truthfulness on the part of the legal profession. He's simply using the ah sound that he or she grew up speaking. Lawyer. So if you say lawyer, it sounds like something different. It doesn't sound like lawyer. So that ah sound does not exist. In fact, in Hindi, for English loan words, there's a special symbol that they use to represent that English ah sound because it's so foreign to Indian languages. So ah, and that ah is not awe. Okay. So that's it for the vowels. And then there's the ow. Ow is, again, it is a sliding sound like this between the ah and the oo. Like the I goes along that slide between the ah and the e. Okay, so I'll pause. And finally, we have which I've shown with the in front of it. It's simply a nasalized and then So let's go ahead and you can repeat these. Okay, so that's good. So this is a lot of what you hear in vocalizing. You know, the first thing that a baby does, babies start to vocalize, and they'll start making sounds like ah, ah, ah. And, they start vocalizing a little differently. They're starting with vowels, and then the next thing they'll go with are the labials. Ma, ma, pa, amma, amma, ma, pa. So, these are kind of the basic things, but the vowels are really the core of what we do in vocalizing. So let's talk about the consonants. And I know this might look a little complicated, but it's really not. We're going to take this one row at a time. So these velar sounds, they're in the back of the throat. Ka, ka, ga, ga, na. Now, all of these have something in common. So this is hard, no breath. This is hard breath. This is soft, no breath. And this is soft breath. And this one is the nasal. So I've got the columns going down. I've got rows going across. Now, one of the things that's a little different is this distinction between ka and ka. So ka is pretty easy. I mean, we all know how to say ka. We started out, we were in 3rd grade, and we say, you're a caca-poo-poo head. I mean, it's very easy. Okay, ka sounds naturally. But we naturally give it some breath. So here's what I want you to do. Okay, and I'm going to pause it for doing this. I'm going to have you try saying ka without breath and ka with breath. And I want you to hold your hand right in front of your mouth. And I want you to try to feel the breath blowing on your fingertips. So you're just going to hold your fingertips right up in front of your mouth, and I want you to feel the breath blowing on your fingertips, okay? So I'm going to pause recording, and we're going to do this. So when you say ka, you should not feel breath blowing on your fingertips. I want you to make a conscious effort to not make breath come out when you say ka. And when you say ka, you can say it normally and let breath come out, okay? So I'm going to pause. So these palatals, again, cha, no breath. You shouldn't feel breath on your fingers. Cha, it's okay to breathe normally. So cha, cha. Let's go ahead. We have the soft version. Ja, 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 ja. Again, ja, you shouldn't feel breath coming out. Ja, you can have breath coming out normally. Okay, this next row, the retroflex, or sometimes called the cerebrals, they're called actually in Sanskrit murdanyas, because the tongue goes against the alveolar ridge, which is part of the skull. It's that ridge behind the top row of front teeth. Da is the T with a da under it. So da. Now, in English, we normally, the tip of the tongue is usually a little sloppy. It's sort of in between that ridge and the teeth. It's usually kind of slopped against the back of the front row of top teeth. But we actually want to put it against that little gum ridge. So we're going to say da without breath and then ta with breath. So try. I'm going to pause it. Say after me. Da. Good. And then we have the soft version. Again, the same place. Da and da. The tongue is against that alveolar ridge behind the top of the front row of top teeth. And then the next row, now these are the dentals. The dentals are actually pronounced with the tongue against the tip of the top row of front teeth. So this makes it a little softer. It's a softer sound, especially if you, like me, if your teeth are a little crooked, it's going to be very soft. So ta, 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 ta. This is a very common letter in Sanskrit. And it's not really like the way that we say our ta in English. So go ahead and good. Okay. And then the soft version, da, da. Again, tongue against the tip of the teeth. Da. So this na is pronounced with the tongue against the teeth. Tongue there on the teeth. Finally, we have the labials. Now, the labials are actually the hardest ones to say without breath. So this is a good practice for saying consonants without breath. Again, hold your fingertips right up in front of your mouth. Pa, 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 pa. Trying to say pa without breath is really, really tough. So let's try ba and ba. These are the soft versions. Ba, ba. So let's go ahead. Perfectly obvious. We don't even need to try that because you already know how to say it. I'm just starting to bump into our time limit here. So we're just about done. These semi-vowels, very simple. Ya, there's absolutely no trick to that. Ra. Now remember, as I said, in re, this ra is with the tongue in the front of the mouth. It's not a ra, ra. It's ra. It's toward the front, like in Spanish. La, again, very straightforward, and va. Now, va, I should mention, is sometimes gets the W sound when it comes in combination with something else. So, for example, you have vikriti, and there va has the v sound, as you might expect, but there's also twuk, meaning skin, and twuk, the V becomes like a W, wa, twuk. Okay, very simple, very straightforward. Finally, we've got these three sibilants. So and I am not going to drill you on trying to differentiate because, there are not many people, even amongst people who speak Sanskrit, who care that much about whether you can differentiate. Bengalis will usually insist that they can very clearly differentiate between sa and sha. But this is sha, sa, sha, and sa. Again, this is like in our triangle diagram. We have this sha, that's this guy here. The Harvard Kyoto system uses a Z for that one. And there's this one, which we use a capital S for. And then there's this one, which is just sa. And the sha is halfway in between sa and sha. Sha. Again, not a really critical distinction. And ha, very obvious. Ha, 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 ha. And that ends our session for today. So before I close, any questions? I hope this was all useful and interesting. I encourage you to do some practice, especially try practicing your pronunciation. Practice those vowels and practice trying to say the consonants without breath. I think these are the two trickiest things, saying the vowels without moving your mouth and saying the consonants without breath. So we're not really going to spend more time on pronunciation. This has been the whole thing that we're doing with Sanskrit pronunciation is what we've covered. Obviously, we're going to be pronouncing all the vocabulary words that we go through, but that's it in terms of our in-depth coverage of pronunciation. So if there aren't any questions, I will end there. Again, I thank you very much. I am very grateful to have the opportunity to share my love and passion for the Sanskrit language with you. I know that Dr. Aparna is also looking forward to sharing as well. Thank you very much, and namaste.